So let's see if you can see. This is the kitchen. Yes.
JaTawn Robinson is a first-time home buyer, showing me around her new house. On our computer screens, because pandemic, she shares her home with her 3 teenage sons, one of whom loves sports and theater.
He's a huge Lakers fan. And there's his Alvin Ailey poster. He did a couple of their summer camps, so he loves Alvin Ailey.
JaTawn and her family are making their new home theirs, and she's jubilant about it. You can hear it in so much of what she says.
So I don't have a TV in the living room, but I have a projector so I can have like the movie feel. I've always wanted to do that. So I love it.
JaTawn is a first-time homeowner, and the term homeowner really is apt here. See, she owns the house she lives in with her kids in Atlanta's up-and-coming Pittsburgh neighborhood, but she doesn't own the land it sits on. And that's because hers is an Atlanta land trust house.
And the best way to understand it is that we are separating ownership of the house from ownership of the land.
That's Amanda Ryan, executive director of the Atlanta Land Trust.
And we do that so that the community land trust can ensure that every single time the home is sold, it's sold at an affordable price to a low-income family, thereby creating a permanently affordable home.
Right now, about 15 families are living in Atlanta Land Trust homes. 6 more are under construction, with 125 more in pre-development.
So we are really working to bring the organization to scale so that we can meaningfully impact the affordable housing crisis that we're experiencing here in Atlanta.
This is What's Next ATL, where we explore the big ideas shaping Metro Atlanta. I'm Kate Sweeney. Today, community land trusts, one tool for affordable housing that's gaining traction in Atlanta. It's responding to that affordable housing crisis that Amanda Ryan mentioned. As we've said here in past episodes, housing prices across our entire region are rising faster than wages as housing supply struggles to keep up with our fast-growing population. This episode, we'll learn how the Atlanta Land Trust is taking this problem on as we hear JaTawn Robinson's story.
It piqued my interest because, let's just be honest, I'm an elementary school secretary. My income is limited.
We'll also take a step back to learn about what inspired the Atlanta Land Trust in its work. And that's this nation's unfortunate history of decades of systemic housing barriers that closed the door to housing affordability for many. It's a packed episode, our first of 2021. Stick around for it. JaTawn Robinson first learned about Atlanta Land Trust as a possible path to home ownership in 2018. That's when she picked up a flyer while on a tour of homes in South Atlanta. The school where she works was giving the tour. She's a receptionist at Thomasville Heights Elementary School in Southeast Atlanta. So this flyer...
It piqued my interest because, let's just be honest, I'm an elementary school secretary. So my income is limited. So it struck me because I knew that they were providing an opportunity near the Beltline for a fraction of the cost of what it is to live inside of the city. And I was like, oh my God.
Here was a chance, maybe, to fulfill this lifelong dream.
That dream was just having something that my boys could always come back to, where it's ours. You know, just thinking about years down when they're out of the house, there's always somewhere where they can come back and say, this is home.
Did you have a sense of that growing up?
No, and that's something that I've always shared with my boys. So I always wanted to set that for them because I want you to have that sense, you know, when it's your turn for your children.
This flyer from Atlanta Land Trust seemed to be offering a chance at that, a way for someone earning a school secretary's salary to own a home and to benefit from the equity she would build from that. Here is how the community land trust model actually works. In a Beltline adjacent neighborhood like Pittsburgh, it's land prices that are skyrocketing. And that's what is causing the price of homes to do the same. So the Atlanta Land Trust owns the house and the land it sits on. But they sell only the house, the sticks and bricks, to whomever buys it, and they retain ownership of that land. That's how they're able to keep the prices low. The nonprofit, in turn, is able to do its work through the foundational support of partners like the Candida Fund and Enterprise Community Partners. Atlanta Land Trust works primarily with families making between 60 and 80% of the area median income. In the city of Atlanta, that means someone making between $49,000 and $66,000 a year. And they work with each home buyer individually to ensure that the price of the home doesn't exceed 30 to 35% of a person's income. Atlanta Land Trust homes range from $103,000 to $198,000. The homeowner is able to build equity in the house, although not as much as they would were it a non-land trust house. And when and if they wish to sell, there are restrictions in place. Again, here's the Atlanta Land Trust's Amanda Ryan.
We ask our families to pay forward the benefit of an affordable home that they receive to the next family. We ask them to sell the home at an affordable price that's set forth in the ground lease, and we ask them to sell the home to another low-income family.
That requirement is meaningful in a neighborhood like Pittsburgh, the community JaTawn Robinson was looking to buy her home in. It's an historically Black community that was established by formerly enslaved individuals. And Pittsburgh has a rich and storied history, but like many Black neighborhoods, suffered from disinvestment for decades. But now that the railroad tracks bordering its south side have become part of the Atlanta Beltline, that's changed. In 2013, the median home sale price in the Pittsburgh neighborhood was $40,000. By 2018, it had more than tripled. Sharply rising property values often mean two things. It can mean displacement for longtime residents who can't afford higher taxes, and it can mean no chance of living there at all for would-be new working or middle-class residents. Amanda Ryan says it's situations like these where gentrification threatens that the Community Land Trust as a model really shines.
The Community Land Trust model is something that's been around in the United States for over 50 years now, but just is still somewhat new to Atlanta. It's been implemented successfully in over 250 communities across the country, in both large cities and small neighborhoods.
In fact, this model, as we know it today, is rooted right here in Georgia's civil rights history. Activists employed it in Albany, Georgia, to house Black people who had been forced off their land in retaliation for registering to vote. So, community land trusts are inextricably linked to the American civil rights movement. And similarly, says Amanda Ryan, our nation's challenges with housing affordability are just as linked with our history of racial injustice. More on this after the break. Land trusts are just one tool that local organizations and governments are exploring to address the region's growing housing affordability challenges. To learn about what else is happening in the city of Atlanta, I recommend checking out the city's One Atlanta Housing Affordability Action Plan, which details recommendations like zoning that permits denser housing stock and accessory dwelling units. Hey, we did an episode on that. And if you want to learn about things going on in other parts of the region and want to get uber nerdy, check out ARC's Metro Atlanta Housing Strategy site. The site allows you to find detailed data about the housing market in your Metro Atlanta community and steps that local communities can take to address those challenges, tailored to their unique circumstances. We'll provide a link to both in our show notes. We're back. So JaTawn Robinson's on a tour of homes in South Atlanta, and she's reading a flyer she's come across for Atlanta Land Trust. It's piqued her interest, big time. Like, maybe it could be her first real shot of fulfilling her lifelong dream to own a house, and in town, no less.
I've always loved Atlanta. I've always loved the city life. I've always wanted to work in the city, and I've always wanted to live in the city.
Where were you before?
Well, I grew up a lot of places. We bounced around. So we were in the Thomasville area. I lived in Adamsville. I lived in what you call the Bluff.
That's the English Avenue Vine City area, historically Black neighborhoods long disinvested in. But as JaTawn notes,
It's up and coming now. So we've seen it all.
But JaTawn wanted to stop moving her family around. She wanted a sense of permanence. To live closer, she said, to a grocery store so she could pay less than the $6 that convenience stores charge for a gallon of milk. But the neighborhood she lived in, historically segregated, did not offer these things to their residents. And Atlanta Land Trust's Amanda Rhine says that's no accident. Actually, that's literally what she said.
It wasn't an accident that we have all of this segregation that still exists in Atlanta today.
And segregation is inextricably connected to this nation's problems with housing affordability. There were policies that, for decades, worked against the chance of people like JaTawn or her children ever participating in that part of the American dream known as home ownership. Quick example, the federal government began offering mortgage insurance in the mid-1930s to put home ownership within reach of lower and middle class folks. But it barred outright the provision of mortgage insurance to Black families and to anyone who lived near Black families. This is what we know today as redlining, and it took place all over the country, including here in Metro Atlanta.
So that meant Black people could not purchase homes.
Then came white flight in the second part of the 20th century, which meant increasing disinvestment in Black neighborhoods. All of this and more added up. From generation to generation, Black Americans had far fewer desirable housing choices, and even now have far less of the generational wealth that accrues when your parents and grandparents were homeowners. Today, a Black American family's wealth is, on average, 1/10 that of a white American family. That means $10 saved for every $100 a white household saves.
Again, the primary vehicle for building wealth in our country is homeownership. So by denying those families access to homeownership for decades, we have created this massive wealth gap in our country.
That wealth gap is a large part of what motivates Atlanta Land Trust, this history of a huge portion of our population being systemically barred from home ownership and from the savings that result. Now, let's be clear. Atlanta Land Trust doesn't just serve Black individuals. And when I asked JaTawn Robinson, who is African American, she told me she didn't really dwell on the civil rights roots of land trusts. She just wanted a good option to buy a house and build equity. That's what got her excited, really excited.
Once I got into it and I looked to see where the homes were available, I was like, oh, boys, we've got to do what it takes to be a part of this process.
And she does what it takes, which is not fast or simple, but she perseveres. And she and her sons find a beautiful 3-bedroom Atlanta Land Trust house in the Pittsburgh neighborhood. Oh, and they add a wall to make it a 4-bedroom so that each of her sons has his own room. Can you tell me about the day that you closed on your house?
Oh, so every time that I signed my name, it was emotional. Every time that I had to initial something, it was emotional. It was just one step closer to getting those keys.
But then she got those keys. And they didn't just celebrate. Her sons, she made sure that they learned.
I wanted them to understand what it means to earn equity in your home. I wanted them to know all of that because they're going to be great. They're destined for greatness. And I don't want them to be in a position where they have to rely on someone else who may take advantage of them. I want them to know it firsthand so they will be prepared when they are responsible adults. When we first moved in, I was like, boys, we have 23 windows that we have to get curtains and curtain rods for. It's been so fun. It's just perfect. And it will still be home where they'll be welcome when they come back from whatever they start doing once they venture out from high school. So it's home. We love it.
JaTawn Robinson, homeowner in Atlanta's Pittsburgh neighborhood, in a house with a lot of windows. If you're interested in learning whether becoming an Atlanta Land Trust homeowner might be a good fit for you, you can attend one of their monthly community information sessions. Learn more at atlantalandtrust.org. This is our first episode of 2021, and we have a lot of great stuff planned for this year. So if you're enjoying this, please share the show with a friend. Meantime, take care and stay safe. See ya.
Thanks, Kate. It was a pleasure and an honor.
I should explain to listeners, Amanda Ryan is so gracious. I called her on Zoom, and then I immediately did not turn my camera off, but I did put a blanket over my head. So she has been giving me straight-faced answers, and for that, I have nothing but gratitude.
It's been nice to be in the blanket fort with you.
Thank you. I'm going to take it off now because it is warm.